start off with Dr. Karl Sylvester, who is our director for the CRSO, the Clinical Research Support Office, joined by Alyson Falwell, our Clinical Research Operations Manager, and Sijo Thomas, our Clinical Research, I may have said that backwards, Research Operations Manager, and Sijo, our Research Informatics Manager. Just a quick announcement, if you are interested in future CRSO sessions or events or information, Netta is going to be putting in the chat a mailing list that you can opt into that will be sending future workshop dates and announcements. So feel free to go ahead and fill that out before we get started. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. There it is. Thank you, Netta. Okay, and with that, I think I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Sylvester.
Great, thanks, Mary, and good afternoon, everyone. I suspect I'm a familiar face, as is many of those who you can currently view, and Mary's already done the introduction, so I think we'll dispense with an integration. And importantly, I think my job is just to give you maybe 10 slides, 10 to 12 slides around an overview of what is the Clinical Research Support Office, and importantly, where it exists kind of in the ecosystem of Stanford Health. We are a function specifically of the Maternal Child Health Research Institute, which is under the direction of Mary Leonard. We are also in close partnership with the Senior Associate Dean for Research, Ruth O'Hara's office, and Spectrum, and the NIH CTSA Award, which also funds part of our efforts. And then, of course, our other partner in this is Hospital Operations and Administration, which we'll run through in the first couple of slides to explain the relationships. Next slide. So really briefly, I'm going to do the overview, then I'm going to turn it over to Alyson, who's going to cover some of our research operational resources in the areas in which we're working, and then she'll turn it over to Sijo. We'll talk about the research informatics resources in the areas in which we're working. And again, we work both vertically as well as longitudinally across the three entities that makes up Stanford Healthcare and Stanford Medicine. Next slide. So we always like to begin any overview presentation of who we are with this slide. We do fit in between the gears as depicted right on the right here, schematically between the School of Medicine. I've already mentioned the Dean's Office, MCHRI, which we are a functioning office and operational arm of, and of course, Stanford Children's Health, and in this case, I mean the hospital and the hospital administration. The vision, of course, of Stanford Children's, Vision 2025, which I guess we're moving up on here. This was made about 5 years ago. We're halfway there. Includes breakthrough discoveries. And accordingly, the hospital has been engaged for a very long time. And this is specific to the hospital mission, right? There's other mission and vision statements for the school and the adult hospital, which are outside the scope of this afternoon's talk. But they've been doing this for a very, very long time. But we got to the point where we needed to codify this and really kind of synergize it with the other efforts, particularly that were occurring in the school. And as many of the research activities ultimately fall into the purview of the Dean's Office and faculty being School of Medicine employees. So the need became abundantly clear that we needed to focus research efforts and funding investment because there was a lot of investment, both formally and informally, flowing from things like the foundation, the Packer Foundation for Children's Health, as well as the hospital administration. And then, of course, separate from that is all the departmental and MCHRI funding. And we needed to therefore align clinical programmatic excellence and research goals so that we could remove redundancies, improve efficiencies in the infrastructure and services. And largely what our office is designed to do is to build infrastructure and provide services. And at the same time, accounting for and representing each of the three entities that I've already mentioned. Next slide. So really, it's just, we boiled our task and our challenge down to really one fundamental question, and that is, how do you execute patient research within a healthcare system designed primarily for clinical care? And for those of us like Mary and myself who've been at Stanford for more than a decade involved with this, Stanford historically, and by that I mean recent history, but maybe 10, 15, and certainly 20 years ago, was a basic research intensive school of medicine and university. It remains as such, but there's been a dramatic expansion in the clinical and translational research portfolio. And what that really means is doing research that directly involves patients and then translating all these wonderful discoveries in order to benefit patient. And that therefore by design brings us ever closer to the patient bedside and a patient care. And arguably, culturally, we're moving from a blurring of lines almost, and that every patient essentially we consider a potential participant in research, which is in part why you seek care at quaternary providers and centers like Stanford Children's Health. Next slide. So this slide is one we've hearkened back to for a couple of years now. It originated with Mary Leonard when she held the position as Associate Dean of Maternal Child Health Research that I currently hold. And what it was meant to illustrate is that there are traditional blockades, particularly in an institution that is quickly maturing in its approach to clinical and translational research. In the red box here are a number of things that we undertook during our inventory to say, really, what do we need to move this this practice depicted by the boxes and the arrows at the bottom here forward, from basic biomedical research, translating these to human studies, advancing clinical science and knowledge, and ultimately improving health. And at the same time, in parallel, of course, we had a dramatic change and evolution in how clinical care is delivered, not the least of which is all the documentation and things that occur in electronic medical records. So we've had to keep ourselves quite busy in providing for advances in research in parallel with advances in clinical care. And you can see just some of the bullet points here, several of which we're going to touch on, that things that we've been actively involved with in order to facilitate the process flow at the bottom of the slide. Next slide. So I wanted to make it clear that, as I said, this slide really should build from the bottom. Here we have the Clinical Research Support Office, or CRSO for short, and we'll continue to refer to ourselves as CRSO. I think you'll hear that in our common language, as one of the main arms of the Maternal Child Health Research Institute. The other two, of course, being teaching and educational programs, and then strategic partnerships and grants, which are arguably more mature. They've been present since the inception of MCHRI, which is over a decade at this point, or just came up on a decade anniversary. But the CRSO has only been in existence for about 4 to 5 years. I mean, it really had its conception maybe 4 to 5 years ago, and really matured in the last 2 or 3 years with the recruitment of Alyson and Sijo and Tricia into a consolidated effort. So Mary Leonard, David Stevenson, and Tony Oro are the directors. And of course, just for clarity's sake, the MCHRI governing board actually reports up to the board of directors and the CEO of the hospital, as well as the foundation, and the surgeon and physician in chief, as you can see there. And a recent addition to that is Dr. O'Hara, who's the senior associate dean for research. And of course, we already have a reporting relationship to her. Next slide. Which is depicted here. So in the center box here, myself as the faculty or medical director. Mary holds several hats, as do I, but she is the executive director of MCHRI. So she oversees all of those offices that I showed on the prior slide. And she's also assistant dean of maternal child health research, which means she joins with me in the efforts that emanate from the dean's office through the CTSA, as well as all other efforts from the dean's office that would impact maternal and child health. Alyson and Sijo, you'll get to hear from in a moment, because we're going to hand off to them. They're going to tell you precisely where they're operating on the front lines to help solve some of these problems. And as I already mentioned, because of my dean role and Mary's dean role, we report both to Ruth O'Hara as senior associate dean for research, who's ultimately responsible for all research at both hospitals, and to David Stevenson, who of course is the senior associate dean for maternal child health. So of course, in his portfolio would include all things research as well. Next slide. So our mission specifically is to serve really as a resource for physician, nurse, allied health researchers, anyone involving clinical and translational research. But in addition, we add the hospital departments and administration and service lines to this. And this is something that we felt was really missing or lacking. And we kind of approached this, or did it, but in a bootstrap way rather than a formalized way, with appropriate oversight and governance and training. And that's something we spent a lot of time on doing. It's important for us to give the disclaimer is that we really want to enable efficiencies, but we have to be compliant. And we fully recognize that many times this looks like a larger and larger bureaucracy and more hurdles. So we go to great efforts actually to try to make sure before we roll out an initiative or we ask for cooperation or provide a service, is that actually we're potentially removing roadblocks or removing things that have to be done, so that we've made the steps and the efficiencies better. And we also like to say we are not the research police. We are not here to blow the whistle on anyone. We're not here to tell you what you can and cannot do. We're simply here to help, hopefully facilitate the entire portfolio on behalf of the whole organization. And so we don't favor any particular group over any other. We're funded by the hospital itself, the Research Institute, the foundation, and the NIH NCATS award, which is the CTSA that I keep referring to in the grant numbers depicted there. Next slide. So like I said, we probably formally or informally established since 2018, when we used to huddle maybe just the 3 of us, and then we formalized, and we currently sit at 4 FTEs. We are funded for an additional, which is a spot that's yet to be filled. We provide operational and informatics support. So the boxes are the domains in which we work, or at the bottom here. The CRSO ops support, you can read the bullet points. Alyson is going to run through several of these in a few moments, and then we're going to talk about CRSO informatics support. The informatics gets really interesting, as many of you may know. Informatics encompasses, again, the three organizations, meaning the School of Medicine is heavily involved here in providing a lot of research and infrastructure, but they have combined departments around all things informatics with the adult hospital. That entity is known as TDS, or Technology Digital Solutions. And at Stanford Children's, under the directorship of Ed Kopetsky, Natalie Padgel, we've remained fiercely independent for many reasons, which are beyond the scope of today, but we certainly share in the mission and some of the resources that TDS garners out of the Dean's office in order to support research. And Sijo busies himself with ensuring that we take care of not only the clinical systems like Epic, but also some of these more technically reaching infrastructure pieces in the School of Medicine. And then we do a variety of other things where we interface with existing services. For example, research participant recruitment. That's a specific function of the CTSA that serves both hospitals and both types of patients and participant recruitment. Research coordinator support is under Mary's jurisdiction as a general function of Maternal Child Health Research Institute. And the drug and device development program is something new. This is under Grant Wells. You'll hear probably workshops from Grant in the coming weeks or months, or if you haven't already. And then biostatistical support is offered through our partnership with the Quantitative Sciences Unit, QSI, Manisha Desai, and MCHRI, which is already existing. So if you're a member of MCHRI, which I presume most, if not all of you are, and if you're not, I encourage you to do so, which the only requirement is that you're involving your scholarship and your clinical investigations in a maternal child health endeavor, you have access to this resource. Next slide. And then finally, the thing that really changed in the last 18 months is we added this executive advisory committee, recognizing that if we're going to be operating in the ambulatory inpatient space, and that's whether we're in a radiology suite, the emergency room, clinical labs, it really doesn't matter, then we needed oversight and support from the hospital executives who are depicted here. That includes the COO, Rick Mason, CMO, Denny Lund, Jesus Sapera, CNO, Ed Kopetsky, Natalie, from nursing, Kathy Bradley, Vice President of Operations, Rishi Seth. We have Grace Lee and Annette Nasser, who's the Director of Nursing Research and EVP, and increasingly we'll be exploring greater areas of interface with nursing and research as we continue to mature. And then, of course, from the School of Medicine, we have Mary Leonard, who I've already called out several times as not only the chair, but the director of MCHRI, as well as myself and Mary Chen. So that group of execs has really superpowered us, if you will, which is we bring various initiatives to them. They've endorsed us as the channel through which all activities involving resources, their management, and largely investments that have been occurring through, kind of behind the scenes for years. We've brought those to the surface. We've examined them, and we're trying to understand financial efficiencies as we go forward, providing strategic direction when there is a question, should we invest in, for example, an investigational pharmacist whose sole job is to help with new drugs and how they're dispensed and how we budget things going forward. And then finally, the authority to execute, which is really to help with this mission's critical strategy around clinical and translational research, but all the while being compliant and dealing with the training that is necessary as well across the institution. Next slide. So this extremely busy, next slide, is what we know known as the fishbone. This used to be a very skinny fish. And while the skeleton remains skinny, the flesh has gotten quite a bit more abundant. We started out with maybe one or two boxes like clinical lab, number 3 here, or number 4, pharmacy. We got to these 10 different domains, and then all the different enumerated numbers underneath this have been filled out over the last couple of years. And you don't need to study this. I think we can provide this obviously as follow-up, but in general, we have things in green that are unresolved, that are actively being addressed, and things in purple that have been resolved and mitigated. And the point of the whole slide is that you really can't work in one area only. You have to take the whole picture of what clinical translational research is when it comes to operations and administration. And whenever you start to work in one area, you not infrequently uncover an issue in another area. For example, if we undertake something under number 2 in information services, there's no strategy for the full-scale adoption of research features in Epic and integration into clinical workflows, we quickly find that might impact an area of research administration, privacy compliance, and HIMSS. And so we have to begin to work over there so that all these boxes can continue to be moved forward and be ticked off in reticent. And this is not something that will begin and end. This is something that will be ongoing because many of these boxes will be replaced as the whole organization continues to mature. What is depicted by the tail and the head here, I guess, is what all the things that have to happen for a study to successfully launch between initiation and study completion. And I think it's safe to say that it's a lot more complex than any of us probably realized or even continue to realize when we're planning our research and doing our budgeting and planning for how to execute. Next slide. So we've accomplished a lot that we're quite proud of. So the stars here are some of those areas that we're going to take a deep dive on. Some of the areas that we won't, at least during the workshop today, is that we've achieved FIS approval for research because of a partnership and probably a years-long effort to get this database available. We had several faculty and investigators seeking to use it. It wasn't allowed because it was under contract as a Q&A, as a ownership. So contractually, it was not allowed to be used for research, even though sister children's hospitals across the country were doing that. And that was something we will improve. And the other area that we're really quite proud of, and we've been very active, is in pharmacy to improve workflows, documentations for investigational drugs, and including trying to do some cost control for those of you who are subject to NIH budget constraints as far as inflation. And then finally, at the bottom, I alluded to, we have a IS governance committee, which is in a partnership with TDS so that we can marshal resources together on behalf of maternal child health that are flowing through TDS, but are also claimed in part by the School of Medicine. Next slide. So with that, I am going to stop speaking. Again, we'll have lots of times for discussion at the end, but I'm going to hand it off to Alyson, who is our operations manager, and she's going to give you a little bit more detail. And ultimately, she and Sijo are the go-to people for any real work that has to get done and questions that have to be answered once we complete today's exercise. Alyson.
Thanks, Karl. So I'm going to cover some of the operations resources that are available through CRSO, and then we'll hand it over to Sijo to talk about some of the exciting informatics resources that are available. So we'll briefly go through sponsor monitor access to Stanford Children's EPIC, infection safety and emergency preparedness training, the clinical research intake portal, which I'm sure many of you have heard of and I know many of you are using, and then some additional support that we're available to provide. So historically, there was no mechanism to provide for remote research sponsor monitor access. Research sponsor on-site monitoring was allowed for Stanford Children's Health, but once the COVID travel restrictions went into place, we quickly realized that on-site monitoring was going to be obstructed, and we needed a way to be able to provide research sponsor monitors access to patient participant charts in order to monitor quality of clinical trials. So we worked over many months very closely with hospital privacy, HIMSS, HIMSS Ops, HIMSS IS, IS Security, MCHRI, and developed some workflows and tools to provide for secure remote sponsor monitor access to Packard EPIC. We now have a process that many of you are likely using whereby you can request that your sponsor monitor be provided access to a number of patient charts on your study. That monitor will be provided access for the duration of their visit. This process is the same whether their visit is virtual or on-site. They have up to 2 weeks to complete their visit. We can accommodate up to 2 monitors per visit because we know many of you have more than one monitor that monitors your studies. We've made these tools available to folks like the CCTO, and we know that the adult side is working on this as well. And to date, we've had 192 monitor visits completed. So we're really excited about this, and we're continually optimizing this process to make it more user-friendly for all of you, and to make it as easy as possible for your monitors to audit and review your charts. The next thing I'll briefly cover is infection safety and emergency preparedness training for School of Medicine staff. We realized pretty early on when we started doing what we call our listening tour, which was meeting with folks inside the hospital in every nook and cranny and inside the School of Medicine, that the hospital had no visibility into all the School of Medicine research coordinators, research managers, research assistants that were coming into the physical hospital, into the units, interfacing with patients and families. And this presented a risk to both the hospital, but also the School of Medicine staff. Historically, there is actually a policy that establishes required screening and training procedures for folks who are not hospital employees, but are providing services on behalf of the hospital. So our research, clinical research staff. And there was just kind of a general lack of awareness about this policy. And so we worked over many, many months with HR and IS and privacy to look at, you know, the School of Medicine training that many of you take when you onboard for your new clinical research role, and look at the hospital infection, emergency preparedness, safety, communication training side by side, figure out what trainings were equivalent. So for example, the hospital, Stanford Children's Health, has a HIPAA training. The School of Medicine has a protecting patient privacy HIPAA training. Those trainings are slightly different, but we determined that they were comparable. So if you take it on in one institution, it counts for satisfying that requirement at the other institution. So we really boiled it down and determined that there were 4 hospital trainings that are required for all Stanford Children's Health employees that were really essential to our clinical research colleagues who are coming into the hospital, or who are working remotely but engaging with Stanford Children's Health patients by email or by phone. And those are emergency communication, safety training for non-clinical staff, prevention of hospital-acquired infection, and PCARES, which is the structured communication protocol that we use at Packard. It's really important that the patients and families at Stanford Children's have a consistent communication experience, whether they're talking with a nurse on a unit, or someone from the School of Medicine. That needs to be a seamless communication experience. So providing that training was really important. To date, we have 161 School of Medicine staff that have been trained in these 4 training modules. They're required annually. We ask that if you or your team members have not yet taken this training, but are coming into the hospital or talking to Stanford Children's Health patients and families, just reach out to us and we can provide the training for you. It's done in the hospital's health stream system. Stanford Children's has a different health stream system from the adult side, so we'll get you set up. You can just reach out to us for that. The last thing that I'm going to talk about briefly is the Stanford Children's Health Clinical Research Intake Portal. So this portal is designed to connect study teams to designated research liaisons in the hospital departments that are going to be required to support the clinical trial. This really is not designed to be duplicative. We know that there are a lot of intake systems already between eProtocol and RMG and Encore, but this is really the official mechanism to inform the Children's Hospital about forthcoming research studies. So rather than having research teams reach out to pharmacy individually and then to biomedical engineering and to clinical labs, we created this central portal where study teams provide information about a study, and all of that information is then sent to the hospital departments that you tell us you are going to need to support your trial. It's different from data that's collected in other systems. We're trying really hard not to be redundant. And it's intended to be done really far upstream to inform budget development and contract negotiation. It's a simple red cap form. A screenshot of that and the URL are here. We built this and went live about 14 months ago. And so really the goal was to recognize hospital operational and informatics needs early during study design that in the past may not have been fully appreciated until the study was initiated. And this often resulted in rework, kind of some last minute scrambling to make sure that everything was set up for that first patient enrollment, and possible effort or budgeting shortfalls. Historically, many hospital departments and units, despite best intentions by study teams, wouldn't hear about new clinical trials requiring their support until after the grant was funded or the contract was signed. And so this portal is designed to facilitate communication between the study teams and the research liaisons in those hospital departments and units. And it allows those departments and units in the hospital to do a couple of things: determine the feasibility of that study, plan for staffing and training. Often on some of the clinical trials, for example, the nurse to patient ratio, the nurse staffing ratio is slightly different than what it might be for other patients on the unit. So we need to make sure that the nurse staffing is set up to accommodate the study needs. It allows the hospital to build costs into the budgets where appropriate, and it has allowed us to create a database of clinical trials at Stanford Children's. To date, this portal has not been required, but starting in March of next year, March 31st of 2022, use of this portal is going to be required. On the right, you can see all the departments, both at Stanford Children's, but also some of our shared services, like Karl mentioned, research recruitment, clinical labs, which is a purchase service from the adult hospital, but we help facilitate connections with. These are the current departments in the portal. And coming up shortly, we have the Heart Center, social services, and nursing that will be coming into the portal. So this will continue to grow over time. As of today, we have 112 new clinical trials that have been submitted. This represents 35 different school of medicine departments and divisions here on the left. And on the right are the counts of hospital services requested. So this has been able to give the hospital leadership really good visibility into the volume of clinical trials that are requesting support from these different areas of the hospital. Last slide before I turn it over to Sijo. Some additional support that we're happy to provide if you're faculty or requiring letters of support from hospital leadership for grant applications, we're happy to facilitate those. We know that the workbooks contain a limited number of CPT codes for study budget development. So if you need help identifying the right code for the right clinical activity for your study, we can help with that. If you need to work with a department in the hospital that's not in the intake portal or not yet in the intake portal, we can help you figure out who the right folks in that department are to work with. And if there are new faculty that are joining your area, we're always happy to come provide an overview of these resources that we're talking about today for new faculty to help orient them to doing clinical and translational research at Stanford Children's. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sijo to talk about research informatics.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you, Alyson. So I will touch base on research informatics and some of the support we are providing in that area. So these are, some overview of that. If we go to the next slide. So clinical research informatics, you all work with School of Medicine, IS department, IT department for research support. But I am part of Packard IS, and why Packard IS is involved supporting clinical research is basically, you can read from this, all the data is getting generated at the hospital side. So we have to work very closely with School of Medicine IT, Research IT, and Research Informatics Center to ensure that we are transferring the data right and we are creating the right atmosphere for the learning health system. So to support the research workflows that is mostly happening at the hospital side, it is very important to have some kind of support for you at the hospital side. And we are trying to fulfill that through this, CRSO structure. So that is clinical research informatics in definition. Let's go to the next slide. So all of you heard about OnCore a lot of, in the past many times, and OnCore is our clinical trial management system. Even though you do the study design in OnCore and many of the budgeting in OnCore, you have to use EPIC most of the time because patient visit is happening at the hospital side, medications are given, lab is drawn, everything is happening at the hospital side, and everything happens through EPIC. So there is a need to use EPIC most of the time to support the study. And in my role, I try to help you actually, how to efficiently use EPIC. We worked with our hospital regulatory department and privacy department to ensure that what all are the right things to do in EPIC. So there is an overlap between EPIC and CTMS, as you can see. There are a lot of things that needs to be kept in the CTMS and some things needs to be in EPIC. So we ensure that the right things are done in the right system and help you in that process. So we closely work with OnCore team, and there is a plan to integrate OnCore to EPIC in the future. So we have aligned the workflows in such a way that when that integration happens, it will be very seamless. Let's go to the next. So here, the life cycle, clinical trial life cycle happening at the hospital, you can see that it starts with the appointments. Even if you want to screen a patient whether to eligible for a study, you have to have an appointment for the patient, you have to order some screening test, and that billing comes into play, how you are diverting that bills. And the research coordinators may have to schedule the patients. Otherwise, it is very difficult to get the help from scheduling folks because they are very busy with the clinical operations. So in each step of the hospital visit happening for the patient, there is an opportunity for the research team and research coordinator to ensure that things are done right in EPIC. So there is an opportunity to say that this activity is happening to support research. For example, when you place an order for research purposes, there is an option in EPIC to say that this order is particularly for this research study. So there are a couple of advantages. One is it will make it very visible in the system that anybody who see it can understand this is for research. And the second, it helps with billing. It will ensure that bill do not go to insurance and it comes to the research PTA. So in all these steps that happens for a patient through the hospital visit, there is an opportunity to do the things in the right way so that it helps both the research teams and the clinical operations and the clinical folks. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah. So as I mentioned, if the things are getting right or being done right, that means if orders are linked to the study, if the patient is enrolled in the EPIC at the right time, all this will ensure that there is the right billing downstream because EPIC is set to trigger the bills automatically most of the time. And this will ensure that billing is segregated into a research bucket and an insurance bucket. And it will be easier for the coordinator to review it and approve it. And we are making this functionality available for the coordinator in EPIC. In the past, there used to be PDF reports being sent to the coordinators. They had to print it out, scan it, mark it in the paper. But we started transitioning the coordinators to do this review in EPIC so that it is very easy. They can do this anytime and it is very transparent and visible. And the review is going to be more and more easier if every step before that is done in the right way. Let's go to the next step, next slide. And one another thing to remember is that hospital PFS, patient financial services, is holding the bills until the coordinator reviews it. So that means it is not only the research bills they're holding the whole bill from a visit. Even the research part is just one lab draw because they need that authorization from the research coordinator that billing is right. So that means the research team can hold up bills into tens of thousands of dollars, even for a small research visit. And if it is a hospital admission, it can come up to millions of dollars. So it is very important that we have a better mechanism in EPIC and people do EPIC billing review very fast. So that is why we are transitioning folks to EPIC billing review and we are bringing down the account receivables in EPIC a lot compared to the PDF process. So the first thing we started is, as you can see in the screenshot, the EPIC enrollment. That means patients can be enrolled in EPIC directly by the research coordinator or the PI, whoever is part of the study team. In the past, if you remember, you had to fill up an Excel sheet and send it to patient financial services to update the patient, and it takes 1 week or delayed. Then in that case, we cannot use EPIC effectively because if you want an alert to tell you that patient is coming back to the hospital, or if you want a result routing message or anything, the first step is that system has to know that this patient is part of the study. So this enrollment, we started doing this. We made it mandatory for research coordinators almost 2 years back. It is happening very well. Everybody is enrolling patients. And you can see in the screenshot, there is an option to link the encounter on the right side. You can say that this encounter is associated with the research. That means the billing will be triggered right. The HIMSS like it because they will be able to hold the chart in the when they release the records in the future. That will help them to understand that this is a research encounter. And also there are a lot of functionalities we started releasing. You can see that adverse event documentation that is marked. Oncology is documenting adverse events in Epic now. There are data capture forms that can be enabled so that you can do data capture in Epic. The task field, if to mark off that if patient has to go through 10 different tasks, like getting consent, getting blood draw, everything, you can mark it off in Epic itself so that team members can see each other. There is one other feature we recently enabled called Clinical Pipe. You should be able to push the data from Epic to third-party EDC system using Clinical Pipe. We have a connection with Genentech now, and it is expected to be used by Dr. Lacayo and Hemong team in the near future. So that is enabled. So that we are releasing a lot of new functionalities, very frequently. Let's go to the next slide. So a lot of functionalities, as you can see, I closely work with the research teams. Each study is different and each study team needs are different. So, we are not able to say that this is what you need. Instead, we want you all to be aware that there are so many functionalities in Epic that will make your life easier, and it will increase the patient safety, and also it will increase the visibility for the care team. So it will benefit everybody. There are things that we are still working on, for example, study consent, it is not ready, but we hope to achieve all those functionalities in the near future. But most of the things mentioned here is already available. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is something, I think since I'm not controlling the slide, okay, let's stop here. So this was in the past what was happening. This is an animated slide. You can see in the gray color, I wanted to indicate that everything used to happen in the paper. Study used to send the workbook and the patients got enrolled through Excel sheets, research billing was in PDF, and everything was out of Epic. But what happened is that we gradually moved all this into Epic. So we wanted to show that, development. So if you click one time, Nita, so we started doing recruitment through Epic, as you can see. I will come to that in the next slide. Let's move forward. We started doing, research task, adverse event documentation, all these functionalities in Epic. We started ADT events in Epic. A lot of departments are using ADT events. That means when their patients come back to the hospital, they get a notification by email or even on their cell phone as a text message so that they know that patient is back. And if patient is changing the appointment, you can get a notification so that you don't have to go to the clinic and wait for the patient to see that last moment patient had canceled it 2 days back. Okay, let's go. So the first thing we did to achieve this was letting coordinators enroll the patients in Epic and do the encounter linking in Epic. Let's go to the next. And we enabled note entry. Coordinators and the research teams can place research notes in Epic. Our privacy regulatory department approved a note type called research note, and we are letting many other documentation also happen in Epic. People can pen the orders. Research coordinators are allowed to pen the orders and send it to the MD so that MD can sign it. The good thing is that when coordinators spend it, they can associate it to the study so that when MD signs it, automatically it gets connected to the study and that study linking happens. And research monitoring, Alyson already mentioned, it is an Epic and Epicare link is being used and we are allowing remote monitoring. Let's go to the next. So all these activities we did in Epic is streamlining the charges. If you do it in the right way, it will help you in the charging part at the end. Let's go to the next one. So we always hear about the CTMS future, connecting Epic to CTMS Encore. What will happen is that, go to the next, that the first thing that you just noticed at the left hand, Encore will be sending the study information to Epic in the future. Instead of you send the workbook to PFS, Encore, you will be able to push it from Encore to Epic. This is the future when Encore integration comes. And in the second phase of Encore integration, you will be able to send the billing protocol, not only the study information, billing protocol to Epic. So that means we are all set for the Encore integration at children's side. The rest of the whole life cycle is almost complete. We are supporting it. So you can see that it will be in the near future, it will be pretty seamless all the way from e-protocol system to Epic, billing review, and closing the studies. It will be totally in Epic. And there are some areas that we are still working. For example, lab, we have to do a lot of work in that area to ensure that all the lab orders are in Epic. Currently, it is in paper. Those are the things, operational challenges that we have to work with the leadership, with a lot of stakeholders in play. Let's go to the next slide. So this is research participation services I mentioned. We started recruitment using MyChart. All of you know MyChart. Patients are able to log into MyChart and schedule appointments, see their medications, although communicate with the MDs. So we are able to send recruitment invitations to MyChart, and this is managed by research participation services at the School of Medicine side. You can visit the website. This team help you to develop the cohort of patients who can be eligible for the study. And we have created a connection between the research participation services dashboard or portal on their side to Epic, a automatic API connection called application programming interface. So what happens is that they are able to send the send the patient information to Epic automatically, and Epic will send the recruitment messages automatically. So everything is electronically integrated. And if you go to the next slide, you can see this is a little old, but still you can see the statistics. You can check it later, but you can see there is a very good response rate considering that if we are in pediatrics and all the challenges in recruiting pediatric population. You can see that 20% of folks are reading the messages. And here, I'm not able to highlight it, but you can see that if they are reading, 33% is responding to that. The last two rows, you can see that percentage of interest is 4%. And if they read it, percentage of interest is 19%. So that means if you have a huge population to reach out to, this could be one way that you can easily reach out to. CRSO wants to, we are not doing this for PCHA patients now, but in the future, hopefully we will be able to work with all stakeholders to make it happen for that population too. But you can send the messages in waves, for example, like 50 patients today, 100 patients next week, like that, depending upon the response rate. So your coordinators don't get bombarded with patient responses. So you can plan it, working with Catherine, who is leading the research participation program. Just FYI, for to remember this, when you start recruiting for your studies. Let's go to the next slide. We are doing many other things. This is just FYI. We are working with School of Medicine, coordinating with them in moving the data to school. The Hospital compliance and legal do not want research data to be delivered directly from the hospital side. So we closely work with all these entities to help you to ensure that you get your data at the school side. There are a lot of examples that I can share, moving echocardiogram data, EEG data, and Philips monitor data to school side. And all this data is like terabytes of data. So we are happy to work with you on that to work through all the, all the steps involved. Let's go to the next one. We closely work with School of Medicine IT. We created an informatics governance group. Karl, Sylvester chairs it. Natalie Pagler, Todd Ferris, all these folks attend this every month. And we talk with school and we ensure that these kind of requests that need collaboration between school and hospital are fulfilled, and there is enough support for those kind of requests. So anything that you are struggling, how to bring together these parties, how to explain to folks, please let us know and we are ready to help explain it to in this forum, bring you in and you can explain, or we can pull in the right people for a discussion so that we can support you. Let's go to the next. So I think that's it for me. I will leave it to Karl. Please let us know if you have any questions later. Feel free to reach out to us. Karl,
Yep.
please.
Thank you, Sijo, and thank you, Alyson, so much. And I hope this was helpful to folks. I mean, in brief, I think the take-home message here is we're a resource for everyone, departments and faculty, with any clinical research related challenges. We've provided, at least in the chat, a website, the intake portal, which is really something we're hoping will streamline a lot of the effects. We've had some feedback from faculty, which we'll be addressing in the coming weeks, around trying to remove even more redundancies or trying to be more closely integrated with RMG through the portal and these other, as Alyson was describing, we fully recognize there's a bunch of gates, but we want to continue to try and streamline these, but certainly view this as an improvement over I'm funded, I'm ready to go, and only to find out that you didn't account for some service charges that would occur wherever, radiology, lab, and pharmacy, which is just, not to pick on them, but just three common areas that we work in that we see this happening all the time. So it's all about engaging with people. Please reach out to us with questions. We are a small team, but nimble. We can't do everything, but we're doing our best. And I think there was you can see we build on other capabilities like the recruitment program, which is a School of Medicine and Dean's office. John Mall, who's on the call, and Catherine Connors are largely responsible for that with some input from us, but we partner very closely, and that's just one example. So let's stop there and open it up to questions. I think there was at least one, Mary, that you were taking from one of the audience members, if you want to address that directly. Thank you.
Yeah, and I believe the audience can see the answered questions in the Q&A, but I will go ahead and read it. But thanks again, Alyson and Sijo and Karl. I hope this is really helpful for folks just to get to know us and what we do, and hopefully we can make more connections that way. But the question has to do with, whether all these resources that we're talking about today is really only applying to complex patient-facing clinical trials. And what about retrospective chart reviews that require collaborating with another institution and requiring things like PI waiver, IRB approval, SRC approval, and DUA, and that it's very complicated. And wouldn't it be nice to have somebody that could sort of assign to CEs to help them navigate all of these processes? So, sort of my initial answer was I definitely agree it's very complicated, and all of these processes mentioned are university school of medicine site centric, and so really the focus and mostly the scope of CRSO really is on the Packer side in terms of research that touches patients either virtually through Epic or physically. And so that's really our focus for this office, but I definitely hear that. I can definitely agree. It's very complicated, and across the school, every department has its own way of kind of addressing that, especially helping CEs or faculty who are new to doing research and clinical research, how to navigate all of these complex processes. So I think coming to at least CRSO, as from any of us contacting us, we can at least help kind of point folks in the right direction. We may not be able to directly physically help with all of these things, but we definitely have a lot of experience working with different research teams that have had similar challenges. And so, Karl, I don't know if you or Alyson or Sijo want to add to that or chime in while I look and see if there are other questions.
I don't have anything specific to add to that, Mary. I think that's exactly right. We're going to try to be as helpful as possible, but that particular issue is a little bit outside our scope, and we're happy to weigh in, but can't take that on.
Something we did for this retrospective chart reviews, initially hospital compliance didn't want you to do the chart review in Epic, but we worked with the different entities, and now it is more seamless. There are a lot of clauses that you are allowed to do a chart review in Epic, provided there are if it is a small cohort, if you are a clinician. So those approvals, we worked on it, and it is very seamless now. You can fill in the star insufficiency form easily. That is like a automated process. So we did some work on that. That is applicable to hospital, but non-hospital, there are some limitations, but we are always ready to help. Whenever you have issues, please let us know.
I don't see any new questions coming in, but just again, as a reminder, we do have a CRSO mailing list that we are starting. And Netta, if you could put that in the chat again for folks who might have missed it earlier. And what this is going to be used for is creating a distribution list for attendees who are interested in CRSO news or events or any updates on either operational or IS related resources that we're developing, for example, the intake. And also we'll send reminders through this distribution list. When the videos are up on our website, we can also ping people. So if you'd like to receive those kind of messages, please go ahead and opt in to this very short Qualtrics. It's your name, your email, kind of what organization you're with. And then we'll start that community so we can start getting more feedback from you all as well. So. All right, last call for any questions, comments. I know it is sort of mid-late afternoon and everyone is very zoomed out, but hope this was helpful to everyone. And please spread the word to your colleagues. We do have a repeated session that we're going to do again next week. And this one and that one will be recorded and posted on our website. So any last closing thoughts, Karl or Sijo? Or
yeah, just if anybody is, whether you have questions or not, or if you're too bashful, of course, to answer them, please send them along via email. And or if you want to see us focus in one area more and less in another in future workshops, please send along those recommendations, because these are really to be informational. It's not just to listen to ourselves talk, and we want to make them helpful. So if they're not, please let us know how we can improve them or really focus them in other areas. That would be it.
Great. Well, thank you so much. You're very welcome. And just as a sort of a teaser, we are planning to do at least quarterly sessions. So we're thinking about February being our next update of CRSO. So stay tuned for that. And with that, thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your afternoon.